Hello, my name is Júlio Santos and I am the technical co-founder at Fractal. We've been hard at work building the Fractal Protocol, which will enable radical markets for data and help keep the web open and free for everyone. Joining me today is Großkopf. He is formerly MD and CTO at the Börse Stuttgart Digital Exchange and co-founder and CTO at Solaris Bank. And he's also the co-founder of a self-DeFi startup, but we're not going to talk much about that. Peter, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, pleasure for having me. Thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about your story and what brought you to this point so far?
Well, so I have a kind of a long story, so I try to keep it as short as possible. So I have a developer background, studied information systems, and did freelance development kind of to finance my studies. And during that time, I got in touch with Web 2.0 and building startups, which kind of brought me to the ecosystem of building startups. So I started a software development company out of university that did professional development for startups, for example, but also for corporates. When I finished my studies, due to the fact that I collected a lot of experience in the startup ecosystem, I participated bar camps and open space events, like in its very early days. I kind of got in touch with the topic of social network portability very early, which became my master thesis as well. So I know we're going to cover that in the conversation today also a bit, that, yeah. And so which is actually the connection why I'm sitting here. So it goes back to like 2007 when I wrote my master thesis. But continuing, so when the company grew to 30 employees, and after 5 years, I decided I wanted to move on and move to Berlin because most of my friends moved to Berlin and started startups. Were working in some of them. I joined Hitfox, the company builder that at those days decided to move into fintech. So FinLeap was created as a company builder, created a couple of fintech startups. One of them was Solaris Bank. I was able to join the Solaris Bank team as the co-founding CTO, which was like an incredible journey for me because I've never worked in a bank before. So I really need to learn all the aspects around it. Also like what is regulation actually about, what's its effects on technology and how to build a technology organization that is able to kind of like give developer experience like working at Spotify, but being like a regulated company. I also tried to bring crypto to Solaris Bank in like around 2017 because when I got infected by the crypto virus, I thought, yeah, well, when everybody's able to have his or her own bank like in the pocket by owning a wallet, what's going to do it with banks, yeah? And we were a bank. So I was thinking about what business could be enabled by a bank like Solaris Bank. Finally, there was the creation of Solaris Digital Assets as a custodian, which also ran for a license in Germany. But when it was launched, I was already moved over to Börse Stuttgart Digital Exchange because Börse Stuttgart, the stock exchange in Germany, wanted to build up crypto businesses, and they were looking for kind of entrepreneurial people that are able to build companies from within their scope. So I helped them to build that up for the past 2 years, but figured out that the corporate enterprise world probably is not made for me. So it's really about starting my own stuff. Yeah, and during the past 12 months, crypto and especially DeFi really went through the roof. Like the summer of DeFi, everybody's talking about it. And so now we want to build a company which will make it very easy to access DeFi and which should bring it to the masses.
All right, thank you for the story. That's fascinating. Like, I think that really, it's a good background for a few of the questions that I have here. I think you're the perfect person to answer them. So let's talk about identity for a little bit. So the web was built without an identity layer. And this layer would be extremely important for things like voting, where one person, one vote are critical in a democratic context, for example. But also, identities can also be a problem, and there is a value to anonymity and pseudonymity online in the face of extreme social pressure or autocratic governments. It is a tool for people to be able to state their true opinions and for us to get a pulse on what is it that is going on. So what is your view on the importance of digital identity, and how do you weigh this trade-off, these pros and cons that I went through?
Yeah, so I think when the internet was created, so the internet of information, how it's called, it was designed to be like a medium of exchange of information, right? So people were publishing scientific posts, and other people were able to consume it. And when the Web 2.0, like around 2004 started, suddenly the web became interactive because people were building applications with logins, and like I was able to upload my own photo, or to create like an online identity. I was even able to create multiple identities because people started to behave differently in the one social network. Like at Facebook, it's like more private. On LinkedIn, it's a little bit more professional, and everybody's wearing like a tie and
usually don't share photos in between.
Looking tidy. Well, my photos look everywhere the same. So kind of this was the moment when some means of identity was created for the web, but really looking forward. So where is it going? So the web is used to really make transactions with really a lot of value attached to it. So people are buying stuff. So this is where like the first point where an identity comes into play. Kind of there's like a payment, and this should be valid, and there should not be any fraud on it. And then continuing like to fintech and financial services offered through the web. This also from the regulatory side requires some fundamental like real identity connected to a user account, because financial transactions kind of have the highest degree of identity required, and therefore kind of with the usage of the web and continuing to kind of offer more services, I think there is also like an evolving opportunity or evolving kind of identity which is required to deliver that.
Got it. Yeah, I agree. And how do you see the trade-off between like having an identity and being more anonymous? Like, do you agree that there's use cases where being anonymous is important? Do you think that that's, or do you think that what we should address instead is the systemic failures that make that a problem in the first place?
Yeah. Well, from my point of view, it's really important. So privacy in general is super important, and especially also data privacy. And I'm so happy that we're living in Europe and also Germany really with the strongest data privacy laws everywhere, and which could be like, it's likely that it gets exported to the world, which is great because
it's already happening.
Yeah, it's already happening, and this really makes the world better, and we can be very proud about that. And no, I lost my thought.
I was asking about the trade-off between like anonymity and identification, and the importance of anonymity as well.
Yeah. So therefore, because of the fact that that privacy is so important, I really also think that privacy, like when doing transactions in the web, when surfing, I think this should be as anonymous as possible, because in the end, it's a free world, and people should be able to stay as private as possible. I think this like the trade-off starts at that point when there's like really like value attached to a transaction. So like I mentioned, when it's about banking and wiring money from A to B, I think it's there it already starts to make sense to have some sort of identity, even if it's pseudonymous, attached to it, because it makes it much easier to verify transactions and also avoid proof and also like criminal activities, because also like. And this probably describes the trade-off pretty well, because I think we all want to live in a world which is as free as possible. But on the other side, we want to make sure that everybody pays its amount of taxes, so that we can have kindergartens and roads to walk upon and so on. So therefore, I think it's very important to, on the one hand, keep the web and also the transactional layer on top of the web, which is created through blockchains, as free and private as possible. Mm-hmm. But on the other side, also trying to kind of regulate it as much as possible, or at kind of like at a perfect amount of regulation, so that kind of criminal activities and kind of tax avoidance and so on and so forth is not happening on large scale.
Yeah, I agree. We're on the same page. Like people talk about cryptocurrency as like the missing payment layer on the web, and likewise there's a missing identity layer. But there's nothing to this statement that means that it should be mandatory for every transaction, right? Like I shouldn't be able to pay. I shouldn't have to pay to visit the website just because I'm visiting, or at least not every website. So the fact that somebody builds an identity layer doesn't mean that identity should be present everywhere. We're on the same page there.
Yeah, and then also regarding cryptocurrencies, so to have it as a payments instrument, well, it's great. So everybody has a like a purse or like a money bag in his bag and can pay out of it. And I don't know, nobody finds out how much beer you buy at a Späti because you can just do this like in a peer-to-peer manner, and nobody can figure out. And to have such a means also for the web, so kind of having a non-custodial wallet connected to different websites and doing payments, this is just great. Yeah. And also, I really believe that once also kind of these wallets like get some sort of means of an identity connected to it, and I think well, you're the experts also to build it in a decentralized way and make it as anonymous as possible and as private as possible. I think that that would be like a huge step into a better world, because then kind of you get the best of both, right? So you can do transactions directly, you can consume financial services in DeFi directly with the protocols, and like also in some circumstances in a peer-to-peer manner, and this all can be connected to like a means of identity, making it more easy to verify transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk about a few different use cases in a little bit, but just before, there's another question that I'd like to ask, and this is related to your thesis, like data portability. So walk us through why this is important, and what would be different if users could easily migrate their data from one platform to the next.
Yeah, so maybe to explain the term social network portability a bit, because so I wrote my master thesis on what the German name was Anforderungen und Chancen of data portability, which translates plus minus to requirements of data portability.
And that's just a single word with no spaces, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think social network portability was even the scientific term which was used back in the days, which then was picked up by the data portability group, which was the first movement of orchestrating standards around data portability. I think it was like around 2008 or something, or 2007, and the interesting thing about it was because it was the first evolvement of kind of helping users to actually own their data. Because if you look back, kind of the first websites where you were able to log in and create a social profile, like Facebook and LinkedIn, but also to some extent Amazon, and Amazon knows all the things you bought in the past, and can make like a very extensive profile out of it. And all of this data is owned by those respective companies, and back in the days, you didn't even have the right to export it. It was kind of like, it's actually your data, but it's owned by those companies. And kind of this data portability group started to formalize standards how to change that. And it acted like on different layers also of the data portability stack. So for example, it was about reusing the login. So this was the creation of OpenID back in the days, also with this idea that I can have one OpenID account with multiple personas underneath, so which then translates to like I can have a business persona, and I can have like a I don't know, party persona, and this works pretty well with their model, and I can tell like what data is in what persona. But then kind of the next step was to have something like OAuth, which means like the authentication between systems, and then different standards for exporting data. For example, the social graph. So who's connected to what person? Friend of a friend protocol was one of these inventions in there. Also APML, so for attention data, like an export format. And yeah, so when I wrote my master thesis, I found out myself the problem that I had kind of a Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and whatever account, and I was adding friends everywhere. And I just wanted to research and create a concept how to deal with all these standards that have been out there already, and define like a platform where I wrote in my thesis. It could be something self-hosted, so like truly decentralized, so that I really own my data myself, and that I can use, for example, or like connecting my identity server with Facebook, for example, and twisting it around. So kind of that the data is not on the Facebook server, so that it's kind of on my own self-hosted server, and I can just like grant access or revoke it. Yeah, so that was the idea. Funnily, so when I got feedback on that thesis, it was really like, yeah, it's interesting, but like the internet is way too slow. It's not possible to build something like that. So this is interesting now. Like more than 10 years later, internet is fast enough. We have like decentralized systems like blockchains, yeah, and we have with the GDPR a right of data portability.
Yeah, it's almost like what you wrote was enshrined in law.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of so it turned into law that you're able to export your data, and yeah, that's fascinating. That kind of in tech everything moves so fast that suddenly, yeah, 10 years later, it's all there, and it's ready also to build something on top of that.
Yeah, we just saw that yesterday in the U.S. Senate. Maybe we talk a bit about that later. But I have another question on this. So the right to data portability is enshrined in the GDPR, and I mean it is to a large degree usable. Like I can go to Facebook and I can export my data. Now the whole concept of the friend of a friend protocol and similar technologies or protocols to move social data around, that is not quite there in the GDPR. In fact, the GDPR states very clearly that, look, you must comply with this paragraph here, but not to the detriment of other people's privacy, right? And me exporting my social graph means that I'm telling another network about potentially other people. Now, of course, this is a naive approach to it, but I see the trade-off here. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think so laws and standards, it's very, very difficult to formulate them. And now after being in touch with many of them over the past years, not only like regarding data portability, but also banking regulation and technology audits in banks and stock exchanges and so on, I kind of started to develop like a feeling. So what makes like a good law or good proposal and whatnot, and I think so especially like the German parliament started to wrap their head around writing policies in a technology agnostic way, and I think this is the right approach because on the one hand, yeah, because in the end, so this gives then also like freedom of choice, like for like protocols and so on and so forth. They can be created out of that, so which would make it great. And otherwise, because if you write some standards into a law, then again, like 10 years later, it's totally outdated, and people start asking like, wait, friend of a friend was like some sort of XML syntax. So kind of nobody's using XML anymore. Like everybody's switched to JSON. So this kind of This is the caveat of it, and laws change not frequent enough so to make it to bake technology into it, and this is also kind of so when I'm looking, for example, also to banking regulation, there's like in many audit standards, it's really like a technology-driven approach and not very not about really the requirements. So that I need to have like a data center, and auditors need to march in and inspect everything. Yeah, so this helps that the data center is available all the time, and you can avoid some mistakes. I don't know. So if there's a fire, so there's a way to handle it. But you could achieve the same goals by having like a fully distributed network of thousands of nodes that are running everywhere of the world. And this is probably the even more stable data center and probably like overachieving the goals that the audit practice has. And this is kind of also one example where I see like, okay, let's make policies technology agnostic, but let's be really clear about the requirements and also the the benefits for the users and define it clearly.
Fully agree. Let's switch over to identity in Web3. So Fractal's been doing identity verification since 2017. What we've built back then was a federated identity system. So something like a login with Facebook, but on the other side, the relying party could trust that there was a verified identity instead of a random profile. We have changed that recently. So we have started making our users self-sovereign over their identity to the degree that we can. Instead of them having to go through Fractal once they have been verified every time they want to log in somewhere. So having Fractal's knowledge, having Fractal's involvement, depending on Fractal to keep the lights on. Instead, we're giving them identity credentials. So we help them create a DID and we issue a verifiable credential against our DID so that they carry it around. And for us, decentralization is an important path here because otherwise these folks will always be dependent on what it is that we do and if we're around to do it. People sometimes ask us, like, yeah, but isn't it a little bit at odds that you work in the blockchain space, but also in identity? I think that's a false dichotomy. Like, we are building technology. There are regulations that push developers and companies to do things in a certain way. So, we can choose between it sucking for them or it sucking a little bit less because we're here to help. And an example is what happened recently with DYDX. They're kind of a derivatives platform built on Web3, and they have recently announced an airdrop to some of their users, and I have a huge airdrop waiting for me actually because I lost a bunch of money on their platform. And they're not distributing that. Don't know how they're checking, but they're not distributing that to US users, and their reason is regulatory concerns. And this is what I mean. Like, we can come in and we can help with this because we're really kind of like where the rubber meets the road. And it becomes a problem, people pull out, and then it's users that suffer. So we kind of try to bridge that. But apart from KYC, apart from this field, I think that there's other fields where identity might be important. So, for example, if you're part of a DAO, that is kind of like a neighborhood association, then it is important that you know who is behind certain proposals and who you're benefiting or like who you're not benefiting from your own proposals. Or if we have voting use cases, especially democratic voting on chain, then one person, one vote becomes critical, and identity is a very important piece to get there. I wanted to get your views on this, like where do you think that identity could be important in Web3? Essentially.
Yeah, so first of all, I think let's compare like the Web 2 and the Web 3 identity and what's so different. And so we were talking about like data portability and kind of enabling the users to own their own their own data. And I think the identity that you can create in the Web 3 really pushes in the right direction, because we don't want to end up like with an identity system again where we need to ask ourselves, how can I get my data out of it? And so we don't want to create the next silos, and therefore also like the DID standard proposed by World Wide Web Consortium, and also like many projects setting on top of that, the Fractal project, and how you also transitioned with your product is really stepping in the right direction, because this enables the users to own their data, to have the identity living in their wallet, kind of like with this external verification and through this like identification network, and I think this pushes the right way, and kind of once
more secure, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Less of a honeypot.
Yeah, exactly. So you would, I think it's the same arguments that you could take for having like or comparing a custodial service with non-custodial, right? You can hack like thousands of wallets like one by one, or you can hack the custodian. So I think the custodian is the much better or much more attractive victim that I could attack. And so having a decentralized identity, so also kind of like the ID card which is in my purse. If somebody asks me, I can show it, and otherwise it just like stays privately with me, and I can protect it. And translating this to the digital world just makes perfect sense. So once there's interaction, like in digital ways of you mentioned, I think you mentioned DAOs, and I also think that DAOs will be also like a very huge playground for people within the next 10 years, because so my personal hope is that it once really becomes like an official form, like for incorporation, so that you could have, for example, like limited company, and then there is like the DAO limited or whatever. This would be amazing, because first of all, I really like automation because I'm a tech guy. So kind of having corporate governance coded into a smart contract as a foundation of an entity, let's call it like that, is just perfect. But yeah, obviously, so if people vote, there needs to be some identity connected to it, because you want to avoid fraud. Kind of the more official such a DAO really gets. So like I mentioned, so if this becomes a real digital way of incorporating a company, then it's very obvious that there needs to be like a strong identity connected to the votes that are made, and also kind of if there's revenues that are distributed across shareholders and so on. I think it's very obvious that there needs to be an identity connected to it. But yeah, so I would really love to see things moving forward in a direction where the users themselves can identify through their wallet, and kind of there's no centralized party like storing the data and kind of being a honeypot to be attacked.
Yeah, I agree. The other day I was filling in or preparing a GBA contract, and it was crazy how many of those things could be coded in a smart contract instead, and they would just happen automatically. And well, unfortunately, that's not something that will work today, but I'm very much looking forward to that. And I think that on the identity topic, like things, the idea of carrying an identity on you throughout the web is something that sounds, and legitimately sounds, very scary. Of course, sounds very Orwellian. It's something that, like, hey, we're going to be resistant to. I think that there's an education effort that needs to happen here, in the sense that, like, making folks understand that this is a kind of a capability and not a default, and also explaining to people the magic of selective disclosure, because that's something that they don't see in the real world.
Yeah,
right?
so I just wanted to mention that. I think the sweetness or beautiness of a digital identity in a wallet is simply that once the data is requested, the users get asked. Yeah, and then you can approve, or you can deny, or you can also probably specify what information you want to share and what information you don't want to share. So kind of like most people know it from using, for example, Google login or Facebook login or something like that, or Facebook Connect, and kind of you're able to grant certain data or like access to certain data. But I think people are only just clicking on it and that's it. But I think in the future, so if the people really get the opportunity to select what data to use, and then they also start to think more about it. And also, if you know, like, okay, where did I share my data, and you suddenly get more control over it. And I think that's a big improvement.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that for anything that could involve regulatory scrutiny, we will see identity being a critical part. We are seeing increased regulatory scrutiny, even like very recently, in this space. And I'm curious, like, how do you think that this landscape will evolve? Because, like, it's been a little bit like the Wild West so far, and for me, like, I'm a nerd. I love the Wild West. It's beautiful. Like, we can experiment, we can play, we can see what happens. But, well, other folks will disagree, and they want to come in and put in some bounds and make sure that the damage that folks can do is contained, and that's totally fair. So how do you think that this tug of war is going to play out? Like, where do you think that we're going to be in terms of having this space regulated in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so from my point of view, what I really would like to see that it does not happen is that kind of there's no clear rules, that there's only fuzzy rules that are applied, so that nobody really knows what's allowed and what's not allowed, and kind of this uncertainty kind of leads to some behavior which is probably unwanted. And I think in many situations, especially when it comes to regulation in financial services, and especially like in crypto and DeFi, it's so new that it was not treated in rules and regulations so far. So therefore, there's like a huge uncertainty. And so I'm definitely belonging to the kind of people who say like, okay, it's great to start stuff without regulation in the beginning. So because this is how financial markets or capital markets were created for the past hundreds of years, right? So regulation, there wasn't the regulation first, and then the people started to create money and I don't know, exchange it for goods, right? So kind of the money was there, and then years later, regulation kicked in because there have been some developments kind of where people betrayed each other, or kind of the money was just like a fraud itself, and so on and so forth. And then kind of like regulation was coming in like very selectively and tried to tackle some specific problems. And I think in DeFi, the same stuff should happen right now. So kind of, so let's look at it and let's think about it. And while we're thinking about it, to me, it's personally super important that we always reflect that the way you can build services in a decentralized world is fundamentally different compared to building a bank. And this means, so if you build a bank, it's like a centralized organization. You have everything under your control, and you build all their processes and so on and so forth, have different roles. But in DeFi, you sit on top of the blockchain stack, so kind of like it's fully transparent, kind of like what transactions have been made, and it's in the end you're able to create like a completely different financial service ecosystem, because everybody can audit smart contracts, and not only people who understand technology and programming languages and Solidity. There could be like audit companies in the future kind of doing audits on all this stuff. And I think there's not a that's probably the highest guarantee that a financial service can offer in the future, that kind of the user can inspect down to kind of the implementation level how things are handled. And kind of this is like the full transparency on like all the processes that are going on while doing a transaction and doing kind of like post-trade or like post-transaction stuff. Mm-hmm. And you can see how it's written on the blockchain and all the transactions that are made. Therefore, I think the kind of financial ecosystem that we can create here is way more advanced, and is really to deal also with all the current, let's say, regulatory problems that the financial ecosystem has. We saw Wirecard, kind of to find out if there is money somewhere on a wallet that belongs to a specific entity. It's very easy to check. And so if it comes to like in Germany, we have seen this cum-ex scandal, kind of, which was probably the biggest tax avoidance scheme that happened for the past decade. In Germany, it cost like billions of euro to the German citizens, and kind of it's in the end like also like a problem of transparency. So because transactions happen kind of like in dark rooms, or like at least like in silos where you don't have access to it. Mm-hmm. And if everything, like all the data is publicly available, and if there's an opportunity for let's say like open source audit companies that are not incentivized by kind of like its bill payers to make an audit on a financial service, I think this is just like, I don't know, 3 levels better than what we have so far. And I think this opportunity and all these advantages really need to be communicated as properly as possible, and also like in connection with like digital identity. So if we connect it to transactions, if it lives like with a user wallet, if it kind of has like also all the privacy aspects living in that user wallet, I think we can really build the best financial ecosystem that has ever been there.
Absolutely, I think it's inevitable, like at least because of the fact that it's permissionless. So instead of having to figure out a way to build a bank and then get permission to do stuff and find the right people to do it and spend 10 years trying to innovate in that space, you write a smart contract and you deploy it. You deploy a new strategy to yearn like this. It's absolutely amazing. And I think that just by virtue of making it super easy for anybody to play with it and try and see what happens, and that's why DeFi in the past, 4 years, essentially went through the evolution of the normal financial system for the past 300. Like it goes much faster, not just because we already know how to do a lot of things and how these primitives are supposed to work, but also because so many more people can try with a different perspective without having to jump through so many hoops. And I think that the transparency that blockchains offer and the auditability that blockchains offer, I mean, that's a regulator's paradise. And it's either, we know that regulation doesn't move very fast normally, so the most charitable interpretation is that hasn't been realized yet. The least charitable interpretation is that regulation is not about transparency, it's about protecting old money, which I hope that is not the case. But I do think, yeah?
Yeah, and also, so I kind of learned for myself also to try to see really regulators as positive as possible. So because I have the feeling that like for many people it has this, like, let's say, negative connotation, like, yeah, they restrict everything and they don't have a clue what they're doing and so on and so forth. So I really see it from the positive side, and kind of it's institutions that for their primary goal want to protect the users. And that's kind of that has always been the primary goal of regulators, where I would say, like, okay, that's great. And I think also you brought this example of DYDX, and so there's like all the discussions going on around DeFi, like for the past weeks and probably for the upcoming weeks and months. And so kind of. I think it's now about the time really to explain as clearly as possible so what's in, and also what's in for the regulators, because I think in the end we all want the same. So Fractal is creating a product that which is really like great for users' privacy, because they can own their identity, or their identity lives in the wallet. So that's something where a regulator should say, like, oh, wow, that's great, yeah, and probably they don't understand. Maybe I'm treating them wrong, hopefully, but maybe we need to explain what is the DID, how does this work, how can this be used, like in conjunction, probably also with traditional organizations and so on. My current bank could also be like a identifier, or like a validator for an ID. I think it's like all open to join the game, and I think it's about us to advertise for it. And to advocate for it, so that it really happens.
And to make it understandable, so that people can engage with it not from a position of, what is this, I don't get it, it looks scary, to oh, that makes things very clear, that is easy to understand, that's easy to follow, that's clearly better than what we have now. But this type of reasoning, that it's obvious for me, it's obvious for you, because we know how things work. And I think that before there's common metaphors and we're all talking about the same thing, when we talk about blockchain tech, it's going to be hard to get to that point. That's super important for sure. Yeah. So got a couple of last questions for you. So on a totally different topic, like one of the things that attracts me most to blockchain tech is its promise in helping humanity coordinate. Like I feel like we kind of, in a way, we maxed out our coordination tech as it exists, and that's not great, because as we exist, as there's more and more of us, and as there's more and more connections between us and our economy grows, it becomes really, really important to make sure that we're all on the same page, or at least we know where our page is so we can go and join it, right? And if we don't solve this problem, then humanity might become kind of a dark place. And I want us to go over the great filter. I want us to pass over to the other side and thrive. And it looks like blockchain can really help with that. And the clearest first step for me, or the clearest insight for me here for now, is the idea that, I mean, money is the most powerful coordination tool that we know. And because it helps set the right incentives. And blockchain tech help us create these custom economies in which you can generate money or equivalents of money and deploy them in a way to incentivize good behavior and detract from bad behavior and create a community within those rules. But, and there's a lot of experiments out there from like DeFi itself to DAOs. But for any of these things to take hold, for any of these things to actually make a dent, to make a difference, we need tools to be adopted, right? And there's a kind of a big gulf right now in between the nerds that use blockchain tech like us, and we get how it understands, and like, you know, my grandpa and related folks who don't really understand how any of this technology works. And a lot of, I feel like a lot of the traders that exist right now in this space are pressing buttons in an interface based on technical analysis. They also don't really get how this works. And they're using a lot of centralized custodial products precisely because, well, UX isn't great elsewhere, right? So that's one of the reasons, but what else do you think that could really help us with adoption, like to take the blockchain offering into the next level, to make it like wide and popular?
Yeah, so I think that, well, the future of crypto is that there is no crypto tech on it anymore. So what does it mean? So I think, well, I don't know. Traditionally, well, I'm a German guy. I always compare everything with cars, yeah. And kind of the user of a car doesn't know how it works. So like a car has a great interface, so which makes it super easy to deal with the super complex technical thing which a car is these days. And I think with banking, it's like almost the same. So kind of you had these like paper sheets to withdraw money. Now you do it digital. And I think when the step to crypto comes, there's like a very huge gap because it's still very technical. It's kind of products from crypto techies for crypto techies, and also we find that cool, right? So it's just like it's great to be part of that movement and see new projects popping up, and it's kind of like it's still a small community though, and
it is, and I mean like this is not good from a product perspective at all. But I definitely identify with the feeling that, hey, this is not for everyone, which makes it cooler, right? And that's not how you bring something to a mass audience.
Exactly, and I definitely think that once you consume services and you don't know, well, is there now crypto or blockchain underneath? Is it decentralized? Is it not decentralized? If you create that kind of user experience, it would be just perfect. And kind of, it will be about really advocating for what are the benefits when it's decentralized, and so that the users really understand, and that they also in the future probably select projects that provide that amount of privacy or that level of privacy that traditional players are not able to deliver, so that people probably start selecting crypto-based or blockchain-based services and preferring them over centralized services. But yeah, so first of all, I think we need to get rid of most of the lingo and try to make it a little bit more, also again, open for everybody, because most of the services are really not, or are designed like technically very open, probably the most open a technical service can be. But when it comes to the consumption and to the interface and how people use it, it's really not like inclusive and open for everyone, and probably that needs to change to really make crypto big over the next years.
Yeah, I agree. I like your perspective about like, hey, when you stop seeing crypto the first time you look, then the least companies there are with bit and or block in the name, then the more we know that we're at the mass stage of adoption here. And paradoxically, I also think that regulation might help. Like we have when we in Fractal are talking to other companies that are not blockchain related at all around developing partnerships or working together in any way, there's always a tiny barrier to overcome, because you can see it in their eyes. They're kind of looking, Are those kind of crypto people, or what's going on here? Those are the blockchain folks. Let's wait and see how this goes. And it takes a little bit to go over that barrier in terms of credibility or reputation, because the space has been tarnished with a lot of bad things that we don't want to be associated with necessarily. And regulation might be something that helps with that. By legitimizing the space, it kind of also helps more cooperation outside of the space itself.
Yeah, and in the end, like I stated out earlier, so I think it's overlapping goals also of the crypto people. So they really want to create services in a very privacy conserving way, and like on open infrastructure, open for everybody to join, and so kind of also creating these networks of services, or like Legos, how it's called in DeFi. And I think now seeing like the regulators, so protecting the user, I think there's definitely an overlap. So there's probably still like some independent parts, but I think it's now about to kind of try to move these circles like on top of each other as much as possible, because I think there's a lot of convergence between the goals. And so let's work that out.
Yeah, the goals are the same. It's human thriving, right? Like humanity thriving, fulfillment. All right, last question for you. If you could change one thing in crypto overnight, what would that be? We have a lot of time, but you can only say one thing.
All right. So actually, I wouldn't change that much. I must say. I think it's just it's amazing to see how, let's say, this idea took off, like from having like Bitcoin like as the let's say first public experiment that became visible to the public, having Ethereum like as a programmable infrastructure, and developing stuff out of that. I definitely would follow also the opinion that Vitalik Buterin said at ETCC a couple of days back, stating like, hey, blockchain is not only about financial services. It's very obvious that when it's about like transacting value, it makes a lot of sense to look at money markets and financial services at the first glance. But so there's way more stuff that you could build, like for humanity, like you said, like the digital incorporations could be like an interesting field, help to digitize also like governments and governmental infrastructure. Voting would be something amazing, probably. So it's the question if you can do like any election in the future, like in a decentralized way, but maybe to have a little bit more direct democracy, or maybe like in smaller subsets of states, like I don't know, like at the city level or at like a neighborhood level. I don't know, that you could have like elections. I think there's a lot of opportunities, and so let's make finance great create that ecosystem, but let's also try to pick up with other topics and other fields, and also help them to make them more open and more decentralized.
Great. Thank you, Peter. This is all for today. Thank you very much for your time and for joining us. This was super insightful and a pleasure, and I'm sure we're going to find cooperation opportunities in the future. And good luck with your stealth stuff. Hope we can talk about it soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Cheers.